If I'm going to attack my conservative compadres for their recently acquired anti-science attitudes, which I am, respect for the value of honest discussion obligates me to reveal my bias. In other words, I owe him an explanation for why I like science so much. Here you go. I like science because back in the early 1900s, my grandmother came to town in a covered wagon, but I have a laser. Okay, it's not a great laser. In fact, this one isn't even working, which is okay because I have a spare laser. It's not powerful. Output is less than 5 milliwatts at a wavelength of 650 nanometers. But it represents what science has given me, the ability to use electromagnetic radiation for my own purposes. I can use the radio bands to listen to music and communicate with people. I can use the microwave bands to wirelessly connect devices and cook popcorn. I can use infrared light for security cameras and keeping food warm. I can use visible light to help me see in the dark. I can use ultraviolet light to sterilize water or make scorpions glow. Well, I don't personally own an X-ray machine. I can always go down to the local hospital and use theirs to see if I have broken bones or unwanted foreign objects in my body. Not that kind of foreign object and not that part of the body. Get your minds out of the gutter, people. They don't use X-rays for that sort of thing anyway. The high end of the spectrum is gamma radiation. Again, I don't use it personally, but they use it at the hospitals in a thing called positron emission tomography. That's where they annihilate electrons and their antimatter counterpart, the positron, which sends out gamma rays and lets doctors map out what's going on inside your body. Why do I like science? Because it turned electromagnetic radiation into a tool that helps me survive and thrive. I like science because it helps me understand the world I live in. Example, back in 1973 when Comet Kohoutek was in the neighborhood, I could not get a look at it. The weather was always bad or something else always interfered. But one day the viewing conditions were perfect. I had a clear, clean sky, a low horizon with no obstructions like trees or buildings, and the astronomy magazine said the comet should be visible just after sunset. I can't tell you if I saw the comet or not. I think I did, but I saw something far more interesting to me. I saw our solar system for the first time. Here's what I mean. That evening, Jupiter and Venus appeared close together and near to the Sun. Mars was a little farther away, and the three planets were visibly aligned. As I watched the sun go down and the stars and planets appear, I experienced a perceptual and cognitive shift. I was no longer standing on the dirt looking up at points of light. Instead, I felt like I was standing on the outer hull of a large, slowly rotating spaceship as it flew through our solar system, which I kind of was. For the first time, I saw the visible planets not just as lights in the sky, but as part of a rotating system centered on the sun. I could see the solar system, or at least a few parts of it, not as a diagram in a book, but as an actual thing hanging in space. It was one of those stunning moments, like the first time you stand next to a giant redwood, or the first time you walk up to the Grand Canyon, or the first time you order at the Cheesecake Factory. Star Trek fans will remember an episode called For the World is Hollow and I Have Touched the Sky, written by Rick Volertz, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It was about some people living inside a hollow asteroid who had no idea there was an entire universe on the other side of the wall. I always loved that title. It says a lot to me about the difference between ignorance and knowledge, between seeing points of light in the sky and knowing what they actually are. Here's the thing. If a bunch of scientists hadn't already figured out how the solar system works, and if I hadn't learned from them, I would have had no idea what I was looking at that night. But because they had gathered that knowledge and shared it with me, I could understand what I was seeing. I didn't exactly touch the sky that night, but I got a good comprehending look at it for the first time. Why do I like science? Because it taught me the difference between imagining and knowing. I like science because in my generally aimless, pointless life there's been one constant thread, and that is communication. Started with writing. I was very young when I realized how important that was. Writing doesn't let you talk to dead people, but it lets them talk to you. The idea that I could know what someone thought hundreds or even thousands of years ago profoundly impressed me, and it still does. I was also interested in radios. We had an old shortwave receiver, and I used to spend a lot of time with it, turning the dials and wondering who I was listening to and how exactly I could hear them. Later, I actually found out how radios work. When I joined the Marine Corps, they shaved my head and sent me to Marine Corps Base 29 Palms to learn how to fix UHF radios. I remember my first day there. I remember seeing the sign that identified the Marine Corps Communication and Electronics School. And I remember their motto, "The key to success in battle is effective communication." When I read that motto, I had probably the same reaction you have upon hearing it now. It could be improved. But I understood what they were saying. Communication helps us survive and thrive on the battlefield or off. I had a visionary moment then. I imagined that someday we'd have the technology to allow anyone to talk to anyone else, anywhere, anytime. I have to clarify something for the young folks here. When I say talk, I mean talk. My grand vision of the future communications didn't even include voicemail, much less the ability to send text, pictures, and video that we enjoy today. Science has left my primitive imagination in the dust. When I was in the Corps, my life had one purpose and one purpose only. That was to operate and maintain the radios that our controllers used to talk to our pilots. It wasn't easy. These radios were built back in the 1950s. They were the size of a dishwasher, noisy as a jet airplane, and required specialized generators to run. While modern electronics uses things like transistors to perform logical operations, these radios used electromechanical relays, physical switches instead of solid-state ones. When you changed the frequency on them, you could hear the clatter of logic as the digital tuning circuits did their thing. Toward the end of my enlistment, I saw the replacement radios. I saw 20-25 years of scientific and technical advancement in one go. The new radios were about the size of a desktop computer, and they looked like a computer inside. Instead of a tightly packed mass of discrete components, there was a main board with a few modules attached. They ran off standard 120 volt 60 Hz power, and they were amazingly quiet. They were also easier to maintain, which made it easier to keep in touch with our pilots. Why do I like science? Because I saw it make the Marine Corps Air Wing more effective. I like science because I saw some of it happen. You know, these tiny wireless transceivers we use these days? Those were made possible by advances in integrated circuit technology made back in the 1980s and 90s. Those improvements didn't come from a single source. There were a lot of scientists and engineers working on the problem, and I got to work with a few of them. Now, I was a technical writer, so I didn't materially contribute to the effort. I just documented things like fabrication and test procedures. But I got to see some wonderful stuff, like the Milstar satellite program. The Milstar satellite system was designed to provide our military with advanced communications capability. Remember that bit about the key to success in battle? That's what Milstar did. On one assignment, I had to interview one of the scientists who was developing these satellites. He took me into a room and showed me what I assumed was a prototype or an engineering mock-up. I assumed that because we weren't in the kind of clean room where they normally assemble those kind of things. It was just a standard construction bay. But then the guy said something that made me pause and ask for clarification. "You mean this is a real satellite?" I asked. "Yes, it is," he said. "It's not just a model?" I asked. "No, it's not," he said. "You mean this is the actual thing that will go on top of the actual rocket and get shot into actual orbit?" I asked. "Yes, it is," he said. "Can I touch it?" At that point, I immediately felt awful. I was supposed to be a professional writer, conducting a professional interview to write a professional article about a professional project, and instead, like a child or a monkey, I had an overwhelming desire to touch the shiny thing. And I was sore embarrassed. His answer made me feel better, though. "Can I touch it?" I asked. He just laughed a bit and said, "Go ahead. Everyone does." And so did I. To those of you with genuine scientific credentials and achievements, it might seem arrogant for someone like me to feel a sense of connection to your work just because I once put my grubby paw on a piece of flight hardware. It's doubly arrogant because one of the Milstar satellites didn't make it into orbit, and I don't know if it's the one I touched or what the statute of limitations is on that sort of thing. But I like to think that my satellite made it. We humans, we speculating apes, have been leaving our mark for a long time just to tell the other humans we were here. And even though there could be nothing left in my handprint except the place where it was, I kind of left my mark. And I left it far higher than this ape could ever climb alone. Why do I like science? Because my grandmother came to town in a covered wagon, but I have touched the sky.